Hello, everyone. If you want to take a seat, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on the city's website, so anyone can take a look at it. And the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to be showing you tonight will also be posted on the city's website. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Hi, I'm Cecilia Gallardo-Daly. I'm the Community Development Director, and we're here today to talk about the city's nature-based coastal resiliency feasibility project study. I know it's a long one. So through this study, we're developing solutions to address coastal erosion in San Clemente, and this community meeting is an opportunity to provide the public with, or is intended to provide the public with an opportunity to review our conceptual draft designs that we've developed and give us your input on some solutions to replenishing and retaining sand on our beaches. So I'm just going to introduce the people that are here with us tonight. We have Leslie Meyerhoff, our coastal administrator. Can you advance? Thank you. We have Chris Webb. He's the principal coastal geologist with Moffett and Nickel, who is helping us with this study. And then over here, the man behind the curtain, helping us with our PowerPoint is Justin Peglow. Justin is also a coastal scientist with Moffett and Nickel. Just one quick piece of housekeeping tonight. I wanted to just go over the agenda, which will be on the next slide. Thank you. We're going to have a PowerPoint presentation. Leslie is going to give a bit more background on this study and what we're trying to accomplish. And then Chris Webb will take over, and he's going to provide in-depth detail and information about each of the concepts and why they're being proposed for this particular stretch of beach in San Clemente. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. And then we're going to give people an opportunity to go around the room and give us their preferences, their comments, and their suggestions. We'll have a comment card that we'll hand out during Q&A for you to provide us some input. It's a survey that we ask that you complete and drop off before you leave tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Meyerhoff.
Thank you, Cecilia, and good evening, everyone. My pleasure to be here with you all tonight. Really happy to see the turnout here. I think I'm going to have to hold this. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So starting at the beginning, why is the city undertaking this nature-based resiliency feasibility study? Quite simply, this is one of the key recommendations of the city as contained in the 2021 Coastal Resiliency Plan and the precursor document to that, which is the 2019 Sea Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment. So the city identified a need for coastal resiliency building in San Clemente, and so we initiated this study as a result. The objectives of the study are really what we're hoping to accomplish with this feasibility study. The number one thing we're hoping to accomplish is to identify some feasible concepts, as many of you have already seen on the poster boards, and you're going to see in greater detail in the presentation that's coming up. We are hoping to come up with solutions that will help the Army Corps 50-year beach nourishment project become even more efficient. So we're hoping to keep that sand around longer. As most of you are aware, we're going to be placing sand on the beaches starting later this year, and then every 6 years for the next 50 years. So we're looking for ways to make that project as effective and as efficient as possible. We are also looking at physical structures to help keep the sand in place. We know that when the sand is placed on the beach, it doesn't stay in one location. It moves offshore, it moves onshore, it'll move up coast, and it'll move down coast. So even though the sand will be sticking around, you may not see it, but we're looking for supplemental ways to keep that sand in place. As you'll see in some of the designs we're presenting tonight, we're looking for projects that provide multiple benefits. These will be benefits in terms of shoreline protection, benefits in terms of enhanced recreation, both use of the dry beach, use of the wet beach, surfing resources, and then also we're looking for opportunities where we have existing coastal dune vegetation on the beach, maybe looking for opportunities where we can enhance that and have some habitat enhancement as well along the shoreline. And then last but not least, and really the reason we're here tonight is stakeholder outreach and coordination and communication, not only with the residents and businesses in San Clemente, but also our neighboring jurisdictions, Camp Pendleton to the south, Dana Point to the north, OCTA, and the County of Orange. And I'm happy to see from the sign-in sheets, we have representatives from all those agencies. So welcome to everyone. So in terms of our stakeholder outreach and engagement process that we've conducted to date, we kicked off this project in November of last year. So the city received Coastal Commission grant funding, and with that, we were able to hire Moffitt and Nickel, led by Chris Webb, and he assembled a team of coastal engineers and scientists and economists, all of whom are working on this project in various capacities. So once we got the consultant on board, we had a kickoff meeting at the city's Beaches, Parks, and Recreation Commission in February of this year. We then came back to that same commission with our first set of deliverables, which were shoreline monitoring reports from data that was collected in fall of 2022. So we were happy to present that information. And out of that shoreline monitoring effort, we developed what we're calling a critical erosion hotspots report, and that was published on the city's website as well. And that report serves as sort of a baseline or starting point, if you will, for the resiliency designs you're going to see tonight. That report segmented the San Clemente coastline into areas that are critically eroded, areas that are threatened with erosion, and areas that are relatively stable. So that is sort of a baseline, even though those designations may change over time. With surveys, we've already collected a spring survey in this year, and we'll be back out on the beach in October collecting additional shoreline monitoring data. So with tonight's meeting, this is really our first opportunity to get feedback, direct feedback from you, members of the community, on what we're proposing. And we want you just to keep in mind that this is really the start of what will be a 2-year process. So we're hoping to have an ongoing conversation, dialogue, two-way conversation with all of you and others who will probably be participating at future meetings. We want to have your input. We will be considering all of it, so really glad that you're all here tonight. Just to make sure you are on the list to receive public notices and draft documents when they're available, we have a dedicated email address. If you're not already signed up, please send an email to lcp@san-clemente.org. You'll then be added to our list, and you'll be kept informed as our study progresses. So future deliverables that we will be publishing are shown here, starting with a draft conceptual design report, and that'll be published sometime in early 2024. And basically what that's going to be is all the designs that you're seeing tonight, minus any that drop out, plus any that are added, with some additional narrative and some additional detail, maybe some cross sections, a little bit of additional design work just to show you what we're thinking. That document will be published for 30 days of public review and comment. We'll take that feedback and then bundle that into a draft feasibility study, and that'll be available for public review and comment probably the end of 2024. That's our current schedule. The final report that we will be preparing is a final feasibility study, and that'll have the benefit of additional public review and comment. And you can see this is going to be an iterative process with the community. And we are committed to providing that to the Coastal Commission no later than December 31st, 2025. So again, we're really sort of at the start of a 2-year process. Funding for this study has been provided in part by the California Coastal Commission. The city received a couple of grants from them. So we are doing ongoing coordination with coastal staff, both in the local district office, the statewide planning office, and also the grant staff. So they're kept appraised of our schedule. They get copies of draft documents and notices of meetings. Importantly, we are using Coastal Commission's 2021 Nature-Based Adaptation Strategy Memo. That document was published to provide cities, other public agencies, and the general public with an idea of the potential range of suitable nature-based solutions. So we've just excerpted a couple here on this slide. This is really just highlighting that Sandy Beach is, of course, the #1 preferred resiliency strategy. We've got that in place now in part of the city with the Army Corps project. We're still looking to supplement that. But on the next slide, we also have artificial reefs. So just wanted everyone to be aware that Coastal Commission, in their memo, advocates for artificial reefs in some circumstances. So you've probably seen those on the slide tonight. You'll see them in the presentation. Just wanted to make everyone aware of that. So as our team began to come together, and as we met with the city staff and the team all together, we started talking about the criteria that should be used for sizing and locating the coastal resiliency concepts. And so some of the key criteria that were used by the team start with, of course, is the beach critically eroded, is the beach threatened, or is it relatively stable? And then focusing in on those that are more critically eroded and those that are threatened, then we asked, is there public access currently available? Is the marine safety, the lifeguards essentially, are they able to access the beach? Is public safety adversely affected by this shoreline erosion? Are there beach amenities on the beach that are affected by erosion, such as restrooms, concessions, public parking? And we also asked whether or not the beaches were readily accessible by transit, such as train or bus, so that visitors are able to access the beaches. We also asked, is there native vegetation on the beach? Are there remnant sand dunes or other vegetative species that could be enhanced with living shorelines? And then lastly, we asked, are there surf resources that are utilized by the public that either need to be protected or avoided by not siting solutions nearby? So these really are kind of the big picture criteria that we use to develop the resiliency concepts. And that ends my presentation for now, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris Webb, Moffitt and Nichol, to talk with you about the draft concepts.
Thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Oh, it is. All right. Perfect. Well, my name is Chris Webb. I work with a company named Moffitt and Nichol, as already been indicated. And we do coastal and ocean engineering and coastal sciences and all sorts of other stuff. We have the privilege of working with you on this project. This is a pretty unique project. It's the first of its kind that I'm aware of that's come around for an opportunity for us to stretch a little bit and try to think about, wow, we know there's problems in San Clemente with narrow beaches, sometimes no beaches, sometimes there's relatively wide beaches. There's a variety of conditions. But how do we work with the existing physical processes on the site, the waves, the tides, the winds, whatever, sand transport, sand supply, and make it a better coastal place that provides the amenities of hopefully a wider beach to play on and enjoy, and maybe benefit other recreational things of bringing habitat in for ecology, but bringing in more surfing, things like that. So we came into this with very little to no preconceived ideas. We probably had some preconceived ideas because, everybody thinks they know something when they walk into it. But the more we got into it, the less we realized we really kind of knew. So we were kind of starting from scratch, okay? And I have the personal experience and perspective I bring to it is that I live in North Orange County, which has nourishment and sand retention strategically in place. So those beaches are huge. I get tired going from the car to the water and back, and I'm not kidding you. I sometimes have to jog because I'm going to be late for the call, because if I don't, I'm going to be really late for the call. So I know from personal experience that you can put sand on the beach and it'll stick around, but it's better if it's discouraged from leaving with sand retention in place. Sand retention is basically a slowdown measure. Keep it around longer, interrupt its pathway, put it in a speed bump, do whatever, symbolically to make it stay longer, okay? And because you have now a program that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to start, where they're theoretically going to be putting sand down on a regular basis for a number of years, right in the middle of town, it'd be really nice if you could put in something to the north of that and putting something to the south of that could corral it a little bit or keep it in the city longer, right? So that's what we're kind of, part of the strategy is to look at things up north that hold sand, look at things down south that hold sand, et cetera. And then to use the existing features in this vicinity as models for how to hold sand. And right now, T Street's a great model. T Street holds plenty of sand behind it, and it's just because it's a really nice surf spot that dissipates wave energy over its reef, and by the time the waves hit the shore, they're a lot smaller, and the sand slows down and stays there. And then it'll work its way around. So that's an example. Trestles is another example. And then I'm bringing examples from other places, too, from my own experience. So anyway, to get started, what we did was we looked at the condition of the existing shoreline to understand what beaches were considered in a real bad way right now. We call those critically eroded areas, hot spots maybe, or what beaches are maybe in a threatened state but not critically eroded yet, and then what beaches are really stable. And the city had Coastal Frontiers Corporation, a member of the team, and on their separate survey contract, go out and do beach profiles, which is basically a transect from up high on the beach out to minus 30 feet deep at about a half-mile intervals. So they measure the beach width, and from that, and the slope. So from that, we can discern a lot of things. We can discern, how wide the beach is and how much volume's in the beach profile, which is important because sometimes it's off the shore in the sandbar. Other times it's up on the beach. It depends on the season, and their profiles will give us that change because they're going to profile every 6 months. So we get the winter condition and the summer condition. So what we talked about was, hey, what are the parameters to help identify whether a beach is critically eroding or threatened or stable? And 5 things came out, and it's really how wide is the beach? How quickly does the beach change in retreat or erode? What's behind the beach? Are there amenities like infrastructure, or are there sensitive resources in the area, whether it's in the surf zone or whether it's behind the beach, and whether it's a recreational hub, an attraction? So if the beach is relatively narrow, less than 100 feet wide, we call it potentially critical. If it's between 100 to 150 feet wide, this is arbitrary, I admit. However, it's based on about 30 years of data or more. 20 years specifically within San Clemente, and then before that there was prior data. If the beach is more than 150 feet wide, it can be considered stable. All right? So some of the other things that we looked at were, does it change more than 1 foot per year in terms of narrowing, or does it do it slowly, less than 1 foot per year? If it's a rapid eroder, it could be critical. If it's a slow, gradual eroder, it could be threatened. If it's a non-eroder, it's stable. If it's a non-eroding beach. That's the second row in this table that you're looking at, maybe. And then the other criteria of, are there sensitive resources environmentally, are there infrastructure, and are there recreational opportunities there? We can classify those as, oh my gosh, it's super highly sensitive and it's about to go away, that's critical, or it's not so sensitive and it's totally fine. We call that stable. So those are some of the qualitative terms we used to associate with as quantitative as we could the behavior of the beach in terms of its width and its change over time and what's behind it. Next slide. So this just shows you, if you can read it, that we call things critical if they have 3 critical components of the 5, or if they have 2 of the critical components and 1 threatened, or I'm sorry, 2 threatened, excuse me. Or we call them threatened if there's 2 of those 5 components are in the threatened category, they get a threatened. And if none of that stuff's happening, it gets a stable. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So we took the length of the city, about 4.5 miles from Shore Cliffs down to Cypress Shores at the south end of town. And we subdivided this city's coastline into 8 sub-reaches, or reaches. And they're sub-segments, and they allow us to look at the city in bite-sized components. So we don't have to try to fix the whole problem at once. We can figure out what's going on at the north end of town, what's going on next to that. Does the north end affect the next reach down? Is there an interaction between them? And we also ranked what condition they were in. And we noticed that the north end of town is critically eroded. There's 2 reaches up there, Shore Cliffs and Capistrano Shores, that are one right after another from north to slightly south from that, that apparently don't have a lot of sand coming in, or they don't hold it very well. So they get a critical, they get a red line, okay? Then just south of that is North Beach, and North Beach has a beach. It's not gone, but it's got a concession stand that's undermined, and it's got playgrounds that have been, volleyball courts aren't there anymore. The playgrounds are pulled back, the whole shot. Lifeguard towers pulled back. So we give that a threatened, because it's on the way out, potentially, right? Not for sure, but potentially. And then Mariposa area beaches, like Mariposa Point, et cetera, that's critically eroded. There's this revetment that the railroad's right behind, and the coastal rail trails behind that. There's no beach there. The lifeguards used to be able to, they say, drive up, and I believe that drove around the corner. They can't do it anymore. Well, let's give that a critical. And then further south toward the pier area, now in the Pier Bowl, it becomes pretty stable, all right? I mean, I think Pier Bowl's got a threatened component, but then just south of that, at T Street, it transitions into very stable shoreline conditions, and that continues on south through the State Beach, right about to the south end of the State Beach, and then it transfers rapidly into critical. So we've got a really bad spot at the south end of town, some bad areas in the north end of town, and then in the middle is somewhat stable. So what we wanted to do is focus projects, effective projects, at the critical erosion areas as best we could, do less within the stable area, because why do something if it doesn't need to be done, and let it be a model for the rest of the city. Just try to build out beaches everywhere, okay? So what we're going to do now is go into examples of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a number of things that you may or may not be aware of. One of them is called a living shoreline. Well, a living shoreline is essentially a sand dune. It's a sand dune with growth on it that's an actual habitat, that the growth acts to trap sand and to continue to grow. And if you can get enough sand trapped, it's a positive feedback type thing where the vegetation growth attracts more sand, which generates more vegetation growth, which attracts more sand, and it creates a mound, or it can create a high linear feature that's a sand supply. It's like a storage for sand. So if the conditions get super rough in the wintertime and water starts to run up the beach farther and erode the beach, it's got something to reach and take sand from before it hits some harder thing behind it, whether it's a lifeguard headquarter building or a revetment or a roadway or whatever. This example that I'm showing is in Encinitas, in Cardiff State Beach area, where the city of Encinitas put in a living shoreline as a test because water used to overtop the beach in the winter at combined high tide, high wave conditions and go over Highway 101, and it would litter it with cobbles. And then they would close Highway 101. And it's an emergency corridor, right, for emergency vehicles. So that used to frustrate them to no end. And then they'd have to clean off the highway of all the cobbles, push them back, and they'd have to repair the road. So it's been in since 2019, and it's stayed there. Even during an energetic winter in 2023 where we had some pretty high waves that eroded the base of that dune, it stayed there and it came back. So they didn't have to do a lot of repair, if any. I think one of the dune fences that was down along the base of it fell down, so they had to put that back up. But it's worked like a charm, and that's what it looks like if you can see some of the photographs that show the growth that's on it, and there's pathways through it, and they're designated with little, slat fences so people try to stay on the trail and off the dune. So that would be an example of what might be suitable in some areas in San Clemente if we can get the beach to be wide enough. So go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about the first place, Shore Cliffs, north end of town. Shore Cliffs is one of these places that's pretty interesting. It's hard to get to. In fact, it's kind of impossible to get to. However, there is some stuff there that's interesting. There's a beach, small, I admit. There's some surf there. We saw a guy surfing. And there's a little habitat, meaning there's some growth areas. There's a little bit of native vegetation. Well, we shook our heads a little bit and tried to figure out what do you do at Shore Cliffs to make it a valuable site, more valuable than maybe it is right now. And one of the things we thought of was, hey, let's try a living shoreline on the green area because the green area has stayed in place. It hasn't been eroded away or eliminated. Let's try to transition what's there into something that's coastal dune habitat that gives the city good credit with the agencies. The agencies tend to really like these dune habitats along the shoreline because it is a historic condition in a lot of Southern California that's no longer around. So it attracts stuff that used to be here that can come back. So we have an opportunity there. It's on private property, but it's a linear feature at the back of the beach to convert it into a living shoreline. So we're thinking about that as a concept. Now, these are simply just ideas we're having that we're forwarding to the city, and the city's opening up to you. These aren't decisions we're making like, that should really have a living shoreline. It's more like, it's suitable, it appears, to, in our opinion, based on what we've seen others do, that you could do this here. Maybe consider it. Now, the problem with that is that if there's no beach, there's not going to be much of a living shoreline because the beach feeds it with sand. So another option at Shore Cliffs is to add a beach to it, all right? Put in sand. And so, Justin, you can advance. Justin was the guy that created the artistry that you're going to be seeing on those, so he gets credit for the pretty colors and the shapes and stuff. So we've talked now about maybe we should put sand in front of that living shoreline, and we could do that and just put sand there, but the problem is it doesn't stay very long at this site. So why not combine it with a way to hold it in place? So there's a groin shown on your screen. A groin is basically a feature that's a rubble mound structure that extends out from shore, perpendicular to shore, and it's that interruption of sand transport. As sand moves along coast in a current pushed by waves and moving water, it goes up against that and it gets caught. And some of it stays. Some of it will then continue and go around. Some of it will go over if it's low enough. So anyway, it creates a formation on one side called a fillet. And that fillet can be a wedge of sand or a beach, a triangular shaped beach that extends back toward the north or up coast area. So what we've shown at Shore Cliffs is, hey, you could nourish it with nothing, or you could nourish it with a groin. That's an idea, okay? So that's the concept right here. Justin is going to show you approximately where the groin's located at the far lower right. We haven't shown the whole thing. I don't know why. It's okay. But the intent is that it's the interruption feature for sand that could be placed during construction just north of it. Whenever there's a hard structure put in the ocean and it's intended to hold sand that would create a formation like a beach adjacent to it or behind it, the state of the practice is to build that by placing sand there artificially when you build the structure so that you pre-fill that deposit with sand so Mother Nature doesn't have to do it. Because if you pre-fill it, then Mother Nature can continue routing sand around it, outside of it, and send it down to the next beach. If you don't do that, you let Mother Nature fill it, Mother Nature will fill it, and then the next beach down, which would have got it, won't have it. It gets taken away from the beach to the down coast site. So you want to prevent that from happening. You're trying not to erode the next beach down. So to prevent that from happening, you fill this thing at the same time. You put in the beach, you put in the groin, you put in your living shoreline, all together. You see how it goes. You want to go to the next slide? Okay, next slide. If you didn't like that one, you're going to really hate this one. So Capistrano Shores is the next site down. It's a critically eroded spot. And there's no beach at Capistrano Shores. Capistrano Shores actually sticks out onto the beach, or what used to be a beach, it appears. So they kind of have done, there's been some construction out closer to the water than maybe they expected would ever be the case. So here's the deal. How do you put a beach at Capistrano Shores besides just putting a lot of sand there? It's long, so you need a lot of sand at Capistrano Shores. It's not a negligible amount. It's like 1 million cubic yards to nourish this beach and make it wide enough to be substantial. And by that, I mean 250 feet wide is the target that we're trying to get at when we put sand at these places, okay? So one idea is to install a groin field at Capistrano Shores. So this is a groin field at Newport Beach. You can see there's 8 of them. And it's an example of what has been done in other places and been done before, and it's actually worked. Okay, Newport is fairly stable now. When they put these in, Newport was no beach. Newport was, their water was right back to the homes. There was revetment from people's patios down to the water, and waves were splashing up onto their patios. There's photographic evidence of this in the papers and stuff and the records. We went through it. And the Corps came in, same Corps that's going to help you, and they put in 1 or 2 groins, and then they pre-filled them with sand, and it worked. So then they decided, let's do some more, because Newport had this long eroding problem, kind of like Capistrano Shores. So Capistrano Shores is a site that potentially could benefit from installing, go to the next slide, please, Justin, a set of groins potentially, and putting sand between them and letting it run. So that's one possible way to treat this problem on this scale. Now, another way to treat it is by installing something even more incredible, which is a breakwater. An offshore breakwater will shelter what's behind it. This one was put in at Santa Monica Pier in the 1930s to be a quiet water place for mooring boats, and it's worked just great for mooring boats. It's also, however, caused the beach to build out behind it. So what happens behind a breakwater is sand moves along the shoreline under the being carried by waves and currents, and as it gets behind the breakwater, it enters a shadow zone of energy, and it starts to drop out, depending on its grain size. The coarsest stuff drops out first, then there's finest stuff after that, and then some of it keeps moving. So it forms a bulge behind the breakwater called a salient. So what might be possible at a place like Capistrano Shores is to put some sort of linear breakwater feature out there, nourish behind it, build the salient proactively, and then let Mother Nature allow sand that would move along the shoreline to continue moving across that salient and move down coast. So go ahead and show, for Capistrano Shores, instead of one long continuous feature, we decided to make it a segmented breakwater in 3 pieces to allow water through the segments, to promote circulation near shore, allow waves to pass through, to possibly continue providing surfing on the beach, and then to make the structural outline of the breakwaters to represent surf spots on their ends by rounding them. We haven't designed it yet, but they would be rounded and shaped and 3-dimensionally designed such that waves that hit the breakwater could break and peel around the edges. So they might make surf spots. That would be a big goal for this, is to make them surfable. And then colonize them with the habitat that a rock reef feature would have, such as kelp and algae and other things that grow on them. And it's a fish, Mother Nature would do a really good job of making them green. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question.
Yes, yes. They are definitely above sea level. They are above sea level enough that you'd see them all the time. They could be sculpted and naturalized to look like more natural features. So that's another idea for Capistrano Shores would need some significant treatment. Let's move on. The next beach south is North Beach. And North Beach has an opportunity. What we looked at for North Beach was, well, you could just nourish North Beach, but we've done that before, not with enough sand to really make it permanent, but with some sand. And that sand got stripped away pretty quick. It was a winter, two placements, both in the winter season, and they both didn't stick around very long. So it was good sand, too, real coarse from the Santa Ana River, both times. So we thought, what could we do at North Beach? So what started to become apparent is maybe we could dissipate the wave energy before it gets to North Beach by putting in what we call a wave dissipation feature or a reef. A wave refraction structure is another way to put it. And the example that we're starting to really focus on is trestles, because trestles is one of these really effective wave dissipating natural structures that puts a beach behind it. If you look at the photo, lower trestles is in the foreground, and in this photo at least, there's a pretty nice beach behind it. And there's typically sandy beach in the vicinity, if there's sand in the system. Uppers has the same kind of deal. So what we decided to do is let's try something that hasn't been done yet, okay? This has never been done that I'm aware of in the United States of America successfully. I think there's been attempts outside of the United States of America with different substances that have worked. But we want to be, when we say nature-based, we want to have, yeah, it can be rock, but it should be natural rock, if possible. In our first thinking about this, what we're thinking about is boulders and large river rock. That's one way to do it. Another way is to chip large stones out of a quarry and bring it down and fit it in together like a platform, a shallow platform. It's basically replicating trestles as best we can and have it stay there. That's what we're thinking of doing. And so North Beach might have an opportunity to have a feature that would then hold sand behind it in a salient. It would kind of work like a breakwater, but a little bit different. But it would form a bulge of sand behind it, and that sand would be put in place when the feature is built. And we could try to make it as surf-friendly as possible with the angle that that it's laid out with, the distance from shore. And we actually took the trestle's three-dimensional bathymetry, which is topography underwater, and we cut it out electronically from a map, kept its scale, and moved it over to North Beach and set it down. And it's set right off of North Beach, like perfectly. It was this right scale for North Beach. So we scratched our heads and said, okay, that's good. Since this hasn't been proven, this is an unproven concept, it would need a lot of work to get proof of concept confident enough before it's built. And it would probably need to be done, replicated in a physical laboratory where it's built in a reduced scale as a model. And then a wave machine just pushes waves on it to see how well the waves dissipate before they get to the shore, to see if there would be quiet enough conditions for sediment to sit in. So that would be an important thing to do, and then you could do a computerized version of it to model it and see how well it would work too. But there's going to have to be a lot of work done. And our project team, as astute as they are, points out a lot of flaws with some of the ideas that we come up with, and that's their role, is to poke holes in our stuff. And the holes that were poked in this are, building this would be very difficult because it's halfway in the water. So you can build the landward portion of it at low tide by coming from the beach down and placing the rocks, but then you're going to get into the water. So to build the water part of it, you got to bring a barge in from the ocean side and get it in close enough to place the material and not get hit by waves. So they got to do it when the waves are low, the tide is high. They have to be very selective in the conditions in which they build this thing. You can't just go out there and build it like in a week or two. It's going to take a while, and that drives the cost up. So that was one thing they said. Another thing they said was, Trestles is unique. Trestles has something you don't see. Trestles has the photograph that we showed, but what Trestles has that we don't see is outside of Trestles, there's like a high point that's a real flat plateau in 20 feet of water. And I didn't know that until they told me that. And so in order to make this work, we might have to put that high point out there as well off of North Beach, because what it serves to do, there's a reef off the North Beach, Mariposa Point area that you're familiar with. That reef's good because that means there's shallow spots between that reef and the shoreline. So we found on bathymetric maps some areas that we could build up and make higher off of North Beach that waves would hit and start to bend around and stand up on before they came into this feature. And that would cause them to be more effective at keeping the rocks on the reef instead of scattering them in all directions. So we're trying to make everything focus on this reef. So the other thing about North Beach that we didn't mention yet is we're showing if you can hold sand at North Beach and get it there to stay, you can put a living shoreline at the back side of it, kind of close to the railroad alignment, potentially a railroad right-of-way, as an ecological lift and benefit, and maybe get it funded by agencies and have it be a backup sand supply so that if waves get up that high, they don't overtop and get to the rail right away, even if sea level rises, but they simply take the sand off the living shoreline and they disperse it in the near shore, and that helps to knock down wave energy too. So,
Are these rocks above water?
these rocks are above water at low tide and probably slightly underwater at high tide.
And how large?
It could be on the size of boulders. I prefer the bigger the better. The absolute bigger the better. Or they could be smaller, basketball size, or they could be cobble size. We're not sure, Susie. This is we're starting to think beyond that, even going, maybe we shouldn't use boulders or rocks. Maybe we should use revetment stone that's fitted together like a puzzle piece that has a super flat surface to it, but it's high enough to be out of the water at low tide, just at water level, probably at high tide. and cause waves to dissipate over the whole structure. So there's more work to be done. I don't have all the answers, but the questions are good. Can I keep going?
Oh, sure. This,
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I can do a quickie. I'm just trying to,
Oh, I was just asking if you've thought of dealing with the Wheeler Reef engineers and compared to
yes,
the.
we have.
Okay.
We've definitely thought of
Was
that.
fruitful?
Pardon me?
Was that fruitful?
We haven't dealt with them yet.
Oh, okay.
We've thought of dealing with them and what they've done and how that might affect what we're doing.
Yeah.
Right now, that has zero effect, and we don't anticipate it's too deep and it's
Oh,
too low.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to go to Mariposa Point, all right? Mariposa Beach, as we call it. You could make that feature, we're carrying it over. We're carrying it over to Mariposa, the same feature, because Mariposa's got an advantage. Mariposa's high. North Beach is a little bit lower than Mariposa Point. Mariposa is a protrusion that extends outward into the water, and it's probably a landward expression of where the reef is offshore. So it's got a spine of bedrock that goes to it. It's shallow enough that it's got these large boulders already in place. We feel like maybe we can augment and supplement the existing bedrock features off of Mariposa Point and make it behave similar to a wave refraction or wave dissipation structure better than it does today. And if that were the case, we might be able to get a sand beach to stabilize behind it, and that would give lifeguards the access they need if it stays in place. And it could provide the other positive things of we could, have an ecological boost to the near shore. There's sensitive ecology out there now, so I can almost guarantee and expect to see pushback from the regulatory agencies about that, because there's surfgrass out there, and surfgrass is super sensitive. The long green blades that you see growing in rocks near shore. So it would be a difficult thing to get approved, but it still might be worth thinking about. One of the benefits of it is it would help with knocking down wave energy that runs up the revetment now in the vicinity of the railroad and the pathway behind it. So as sea level, what we're trying to do is not only solve the existing condition, we're trying to look at sea level rise. What if it's a meter, 3 feet, I don't know, 3.5 feet? We need stuff to knock down wave energy as far from shore as possible and then provide that, additional cushion of a sand beach to absorb more energy after that. So then if we move further south, we're going to get to the pier area, Pier Bowl. Go ahead.
They're all mutually exclusive.
Yes,
right?
they are. They are. It's all, we looked at each reach. We tried to make something kind of that might consider the reach before it and the reach after it, but essentially these are independent units. And these are not necessarily, let's do it all. It's more like, realistically, it might be, let's pick one and see if it flies. And if it does, okay, maybe we go to the next one on the list. So the pier, all right. I don't even need this microphone, I don't think, do I? Okay, we'll try to keep the recording audio going. So the pier is an opportunity that I don't know if you've thought much about for holding sand. Some piers act to hold sand. Other piers don't. Not many of them do, frankly, only a few. But the ones that hold sand are the ones that have large piles close together that do a heck of a job of interrupting the current that goes through there when there's high energy on the ocean. When there's high energy and there's a current, that's when sand's really being moved, okay? So if you can interrupt that and confuse it and knock it down, cause it to swirl and get rid of the laminar straight flow direction and have it start to become, something other than that, what you'll get is you'll get riptides and you'll get sand dropping out of the transport path. And Huntington Beach Pier does that really well. It's because it's massive. It's huge. So I took a photo of it on the right and I showed it compared to San Clemente Pier on the left. And what San Clemente Pier has is a foundation starting point for if you wanted to try to do what's called a permeable pile feature, sand retention feature, you could add piles on one side or the other of the pier and put them close together and see if they work to slow down sand transport. And if they did, you could add more, or if it didn't work, you could take it all out. This kind of thing has been thought of elsewhere. It's been put in the East Coast in a few places. It was thought of extensively by the County of Santa Barbara for Goleta Beach Pier, and it was not installed because the Coastal Commission wanted the county to retreat rather than advance. But I don't know if that's still the thinking up there. So we took that same kind of idea and brought it to San Clemente and thought, well, maybe if the city's got the willingness to try this, try a test case of making the pile arrangement denser on one side of the pier alongside it, because they can be driven from the top. A pile driver could go out on the pier if it supports it. They could be driven in an arrangement that it would be kind of an experiment. You could do it in a laboratory first to see what kind of arrangement would work, and then do it in real life to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you pull them back out. If it does work, maybe you leave them in. And if it does work and you like it, you could extend the deck over it and make the deck wider. You know, it's another way to do that too. So that was one idea. Now, the Corps of Engineers is going to do a project centered on the pier. So there's a lot of sand that's going to go there, and so this is an opportunity to maybe keep it in the vicinity. That's all we're thinking. The only other thing we're thinking of in the vicinity of the pier bowl is to maybe do a living shoreline north of the lifeguard or headquarter building, back toward the back of the beach, as an interpretive educational opportunity to demonstrate. Just a demonstration to see if you can put a mound of dune back there that can stay and get built up naturally on its own. Once the Corps of Engineers place sand is in place and is there to blow by the wind up into that dune, it probably would do a good job of sustaining it. So that's just an educational opportunity that we show in one part of it. And I think that's all for this site. The next site is T Street, and T Street gets an A+. There's nothing needed at T Street. So we're not going to suggest that anybody do anything other than maybe watch it and see how good it works and take photos of it and document it and say, how could we do this somewhere else? I still don't know how to duplicate T Street. But the problem is, see, T Street's got a different geology. It's like I hope I'm right about this, asking the surfer of T Street. I think it's a solid reef, solid bedrock reef. So it's not a cobble feature. They're easier to build. A solid bedrock thing means you got to pour the concrete, probably, and make it.
Big boulders,
By the way,
those big boulders.
the pier piles could be e-concrete. There's a substance called e-concrete, which is concrete that has the propensity for marine growth to really grab onto it and be more growy, more green. Anyway, south of T Street, we'd recommend that you consider taking what space that exists that is not as intensely used recreationally and put in some demonstration living shoreline patches. Maybe take what's there in the form of a berm that towards the railroad right-of-way, there's a berm. It's got vegetation on it. Maybe strip some of the vegetation off that's not native or is upland and not as desirable as a dune, and maybe bury it with sand and replace it with a dune. So we have some footprints that we show in numbers 1 and 1 right there on the screen. And that same thing is going to be recommended down south in the State Beach area, but there's no direct nourishment being suggested here because it doesn't need it right now, and no sand retention, okay? And so if you look down at the State Campground Beach, similar type of thing is recommended. Take the existing berm that is near or in the railroad right-of-way. We'll have to work with you on that, Stan, if it's something you'd ever consider, and maybe convert it into a living shoreline because it's got a linear alignment. It's close to sand source. Maybe it's something that could work. If not, maybe we just do it seaward of that out on the beach and make it. The one thing that you have as a possibility is to take advantage of is a whole lot of different little footprints you could use as individual experimentation plots of how to make it work better. Maybe plant it in one, maybe seed it in another. Maybe don't do either of those in the third, but put in shims or some sort of sand accretion posts to see if it accretes sand faster. So it's just it's a learning opportunity. It could be a learning laboratory. I don't know if you're interested in that, but it's a possibility. Yeah.
State Beach area. Part of the State Beach area, and I'm referring to mostly and up to up a little ways, to close up to close to where the volleyball courts are, Lost Winds.
Okay.
Okay. There is a lot of, there used to be a lot more, but there is still some dune
Okay.
vegetation and dune. But for the last, since many years I've lived there, the state park lifeguard system part to protect that.
Okay.
They are driving their trucks on it.
Okay.
And
All
wearing
right.
it down. I just want that
Sure.
documented
Okay.
into this
Okay.
presentation so that and the erosion that's going on.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Sure.
that maybe
And it's, so your comment about the fact that the park's use of the beach or maintenance or work on their beach tends to be in conflict with the ability of the dune to really thrive. We could, it's the most easiest thing to do is to partner with parks, have a discussion, see if they're interested. If they are, maybe work together to have the operational thing. The city's got to drive on the beach too, so the city guards need to understand where to drive, where to not drive. And so that's a great point. Thank you for bringing it up. And I'm confident we could work with that agency to learn more.
they would be
Yeah. The state park system is so dune friendly. Oh my gosh.
not in that area.
Well, in my area they are. I mean, Bolsa Chica State Beach and Honey State Beach, they rope it off the minute they see anything that's similar to it. And they're doing more and more of that every day. So their staff is very in tune with that. And their staff does cover this place.
We tried to educate them, but
All right. Well, let's talk to the right guy.
Dana Point, yeah.
Okay. So the last place on the list is the south end of town. South end of town is a big fat problem. And we know the problem is hard to solve. So we scratched our heads on this one, and we know this. There's these wave refraction, wave dissipating structures at trestles, lower trestles, upper trestles, church, cottons. Put in another one, put in one farther north that is right in front of Cypress Shores. And the reason why we think that's a good location is this. Well, we were told by the geologist that was part of the construction of the landslide fix was that the toe of that landslide daylights in the surf zone off the beach. And if you can weigh that toe down and put mass on it in terms of massive amount of weight, because there used to be so much sand in that system that it provided the weight to stabilize the toe of that landslide. But what we've been told is since it's not there, if we put something there that does that in the form of a big heavy rock footprint, it probably will it will help improve the condition of that landslide. It might slow it down, might even stop it. I don't know. No guarantees. But in addition to that, you have the issue of trying to slow sand down before it leaves the city to the south. So if you want to keep it in the city, this is your last chance. So we're talking about put some big thing out there. Don't let it affect cottons. Keep it away from cottons. But put something out there that slows the transport of sand down and maybe makes it stay long enough so it goes in the other direction the next season. If you could have it bouncing back and forth between Cypress Shores and North Beach, you'd be in heaven. You wouldn't have, the Corps of Engineers sand would just be building and building and building. See, because the city of San Clemente is probably going to need to put a lot of sand down to make this work. The Corps of Engineers sand may not be enough. It's generous and it's important. It's a definite starting point. But what we're talking about here is adding more sand than that over time at places that the Corps is not going to put it down at. And maybe the Corps sand will stick around long enough to do the job, but if it doesn't, this is an investment the city would have to make as well as putting in more sand. So if you can reduce the amount of times you got to do that and how much sand you got to put down there on the beach, great. It's more effective. So with that, I am done, and we're going to open it up to questions, more so than we've already done.
That's fine. If anyone has questions, we ask that you come to the podium. Otherwise, your question will not be caught on the recording or the video. So come up to the podium so that we can capture your question. Thank you.
Okay, so just ask a question.
You have to hit the red at the button.
So you just ask. At the Cypress Shore Reach, we've had a lot of changes recently from the OTCA, and maybe outside of their scope, but some mitigation for the work that's been done, for the emergency work. Is there anything about that that we can talk about tonight?
Well, the work that's being done, or that has been done by OCTA, that does require mitigation, or that has been the topic of mitigation in that area, really is the purview of OCTA. And we recognize that this is a private beach, so it would be up to the HOAs and property owners in that area and the Orange County Transportation Authority. We do have a couple of Orange County Transportation Authority representatives in the room tonight, so perhaps they can give you their card as something to talk about. We have requested collaboration and coordination with OCTA as we look for solutions. One thing that we have made clear as far as the city's position is where the railroad revetment is, where the railroad is most stable and doesn't require a revetment or shoring up the revetment, is where you have a wide sandy beach. It's where the beach has eroded and there's no beach left, that the rail line is compromised. So we're working collaboratively with OCTA to look at solutions together that we can partner on.
There's no
You
beach access.
have to come to the podium, please. Thank you.
So there is no public access.
Yes, that is a concern. And one of the reasons for focusing that location for some sort of structure that knocks down wave energy and allows a beach to form behind it is to restore the access from along the beach, lateral access at that location.
Okay. Hi, Angela Howe, Senior Legal Director for Surfrider and resident of San Clemente. Thank you so much for the presentation, all the hard work everyone has put into this. My question was actually immediately on that last section as well, the Cypress Shores. And similarly, you know, the concern about access, the concern about the 26,000 tons of boulders put there, and how it's already affected cottons. That's a real concern for surfers of trestles as well. So when you were saying, we'll put this here and not let it affect cottons, there was just no explanation for how that was anticipated or if that's possible.
So the idea is to not put material in that would become dislodged and move toward cottons, and not, the way wave energy would be intercepted by this feature would be far enough away from cottons so that as waves approach cottons, feel the bottom, refract over it and break and peel. Whatever's happening at the Cypress Shores site or the South City site would be independent of that. So the wave would break over to the north farther, peel maybe toward cottons but not get to it. So we just wanted to provide enough distance between the two breaks to make sure that the waves don't interact. And there's a channel between them, basically, is what we're trying to get at. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay.
But if you are going to the podium, make sure the light is green. Okay. No, you're okay. It mutes and unmutes with the press of the button, so just make sure the light is green.
So we haven't ranked any of these concepts yet. We use the criteria that I spoke of earlier in the presentation just to kind of come up with a broad range of potential solutions. And in the next phases, with the concept design report and then the draft and then final feasibility studies, we will start to see some of the more likely scenarios, design strategies to emerge. And those will be an outgrowth of not only public comment, but also cost, permitting feasibility, benefit cost analyses, environmental effects. So we will be prioritizing these ultimately when we get to the end of this 2-year process. So absolutely, we're just not there yet.
Hi, Mark McGuire. I also want to thank you for the presentation. I thought it was really interesting to hear. A couple questions. One, I've heard around, I live in San Clemente also, and anecdotally, some people are saying that the Wheeler Reef is holding sand behind it, and from what I've heard, that doesn't seem right, but I'm not a scientist, and so I would hope that you guys could address that, because there's a lot of talk that, and some people even say, hey, I went diving out there and there's all this sand right behind Wheeler. So that'd be an interesting thing to understand for sure, and to get out into your report so people don't assume that without knowing whether it's true or not, if you know the facts. And then the second thing is the living reefs. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the reef down in Cardiff, it's got a series of layers. It's got kind of a revetment buried, and then cobble, and then sand, and then dune on top of that. And is that the type of thing you're thinking? Because some of these are existing dunes, you wouldn't want to rip them out and put a riprap thing in. On the other hand, if you're doing a new one, maybe you would have those layers of protection in it. And then a suggestion, well, you've got your eyes wide and your imagination cap on, scenarios if the railroad does leave, what might we do? I mean, obviously, it's an opportunity, and it also is fearful for a lot of residents because they know that railroad is protecting the bluff behind it and protecting their homes on top. I don't live on top, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. But but if the railroad were to leave, what opportunities might we do? And that's one where I'll shut up, but with all the revetment stone that they have, that seems like an opportunity where maybe you would do some serious buried revetment, cobble, sand, dune. Maybe that's an option. So anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Chris, do you want to answer the question about Wheeler's Reef?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So first, Mr. McGuire, we will look at that was you, sorry, Mark. We will look at Wheeler Reef again. We've looked at it already to see if there is sand stored behind there, and if so, is it, trapping sand that should be further in and all this stuff. And our initial conclusion was it might be holding sand. I mean, it is a linear thing that sticks up off the bottom, so I would think it might. But if it were, it's probably not holding sand that would be on the beach because it's in such deep water. The sand that's on the beach doesn't go out past 30 feet deep before it can come back in again. If it gets out past 30 feet, it's gone, right? And so even if it were, it's probably not sand that would be on the beach anyway, but even if it were beach sand, it's not very much because this Wheeler Reef is like 2 or 3 feet off the bed. So it just can't physically hold that much sand. We're talking sand thicknesses on the beach that are like 10 feet, to build a beach. So the volume of it's not that much. Now, and I'll try not to get too long on this. If we were trying to find sand to nourish the beach, we could look around in places like that are, potentially traps and stuff like that. So we'll look at it harder and continue with it in mind. Thank you for that. And then we could design these living shorelines in a variety of different ways. Initially, we're not thinking of a revetment core with a cobble base like Cardiff, because Cardiff was protecting Highway 101. It was supposed to stay there. And if it gets taken out, there's something behind it, a last line of defense. We don't think we need to do that necessarily here. And then in terms of the railroad, I don't need to answer that, because this is a short-term, relatively short-term study. It's not going to look at the railroads, I think, 30 years and out, maybe beyond 30 years is where their time frame is for looking at when they might need to actually do something different. Don't know, right? So that's not going to factor in right now.
Hi, Laura Walsh with Surfrider also. Thanks so much for doing all this work and hosting this outreach meeting. It's really great. Surfrider has been involved with the Oceanside groin proposal that's been pretty controversial down there, and it's especially because there's been a lot of conversation about how it impacts down coast San Diego communities. So I just wanted to ask about like this groin being proposed in the north of San Clemente, like if you could talk a little bit about how sand moves in San Clemente and how it could potentially affect even just down coast San Clemente, and also whether it would be part of one of those like recommended strategies you mentioned from the Coastal Commission memo, because there's been a lot of talk about, you know, whether Coastal Commission would permit something like this, because their last permitted growing project just for sand retention, I think, is a Newport one, which is pretty old. So I was wondering if you could talk about that. And then the living reef, just curious like what the maintenance would look like, or if, I guess you're not expecting sea level rise to change it in this time frame, or how that would affect the main goal, if the main goal is surfing, or if the main goal is the sand retention for that spot.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we'd be happy to talk about all that stuff. So the idea with San Clemente is that we would like to be able to install features that are friendly to containing sand and keeping sand in their vicinity. So if we were to recommend that be done, we'd also recommend along with that there be this pre-filling of the sand deposit or the sand formation at the time that the feature is built. So it's one constructed unit, and so after it's in place, natural ambient sand transport can continue over it, around it, beyond it. It doesn't build a formation into infinity. It builds a certain limited geographical area of a sand deposit. Once that's filled, either during construction or right after construction, then natural sand just goes around it. So we believe that it can happen where you can put in a sand retention feature to slow it down, pre-fill that with sand, and then have sand continue right on down the coast to the south part of San Clemente. If the city also puts in a sand feature to the south, then that would slow it down further like I talked about. So there's kind of a containment within the city. Sand transport reverses direction seasonally. So sometimes it's going to head that way. I'm talking north to south. Other times it's going to head the other way. What we want to do is slow it down regardless of whatever direction it's going, to have it hover longer, and then it's going to get out and go to the next beach down. It's just going to happen. So the beaches that get sand from the next beach to the north or whatever now are going to continue to get that. We don't intend to do anything to keep that from happening. We're just trying to add it more to the system so every beach gets a little bit more. And we are looking at sea level rise for this. I mean, yeah, this is a relatively short-term study, but in order to modify these and adapt these over time, we'd like to have features that can be raised up and enlarged. They may have to stick out farther, be wider, be higher. Over the three-dimensional space that they occupy might have to expand as sea level rises, along with sea level rise. It's probably going to have to be required. And then the Coastal Commission, you know, how they feel about this, I think they're waiting for the first proposal to come in. I don't think a lot of people are ahead of San Clemente. I think San Clemente's kind of on the cutting edge of this. Well, Oceanside, they're ahead of you maybe, a little bit, I don't know. But I think Coastal's just sitting back waiting, and the city staff is giving them information, so they're up to speed. They're probably watching, or here even, and we'll be talking. We part of our contracted action is to talk with them and explain it, and then hear them, and then talk again, and then go back to the drawing board if we have to. So I know there's challenges out that are coming This is not a smooth road or an easy road. This is a long, potentially challenging road, but it's worth taking if you want to get something done and have it break the ice. Right now, there's a log jam of inaction, and the city's trying to break that. And if the city could break that inaction, it might lead to good creative solutions all over the place that none of us have thought of. Other people are thinking of stuff that is probably brilliant that we don't know about. We'll learn from them. So let's let the creativity flow, you know? Anyway, that's all I got.
One other point I would like to make with regard to sand transport and regional coordination. You know, San Clemente is located at the top of the Oceanside Littoral Cell. The Oceanside Littoral Cell starts at the mouth of the San Juan Creek and ends at about Scripps Canyon in La Jolla, which is in San Diego. So it's a pretty big littoral cell. As I mentioned earlier, we are working with regional partners such as Orange County Parks reps are here tonight. We're working with them to try to do some regional projects, regional collaboration, beach nourishment, sand retention. So we're looking at those options with Dana Point as well. We have Camp Pendleton folks here. We're talking with Sandag, Shoreline Preservation Working Group. So we are definitely trying to integrate so that that the burden is not on each individual city, but rather that we're working collectively on solutions that we're all facing. We're all facing the same exact coastal erosion challenges. So we're all looking at the same solutions too. So that's what we're doing with respect to regional collaboration.
So, red, green. All right, I'm Ken Pochek. I'm with the North Beach Community Association. We have a pretty large group that's interested in North Beach as well as San Clemente. It feels to me like like somebody asked, is this one-off each one? It feels like it should be more like a regional thought process. You know, as you build out one beach and the water flows a certain way, it's going to take the sand hopefully to your other beaches. So, you know, you can't be selfish and just focusing on a beach. But when I hear about North Beach and I hear experiment, I get nervous because it feels like people have been saving beaches for a long time, and there should be proven techniques. Now, maybe that's the engineer in me. I'm more of an industrial engineer, so I may have flaws in my thought process. But I feel like when you look at something and you talk about creating a model and then running out the model and then determining the statistical validity of the model and then implementing the model and then it don't work and we got $5 million later and we don't have a beach yet. So I would feel better, I guess, knowing that we're creating something that has been created before and that's worked. And I know there's different topographies and bathographies or whatever you guys are talking about. It's pretty awesome. I mean, I'm learning, but it just feels like it'd be better to do a sure thing. And I know maybe there's no sure thing, but maybe there's something that's worked before. It kind of fits the topography. Looks like it'll happen on North Beach, and let's try that versus building a model that may not work when you implement it, and then we're all kind of not really happy. So that's kind of my view. I'm hoping that we can find a technique that's worked before, and we really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. I would just like to add that in the broad variety of measures we've shown you tonight, we did include some tried and true, if you will, measures like groins, like breakwaters. And in Chris's presentation, he showed, real-world examples of how these can perform to retain sand. On the other end of the spectrum, if you will, we've got these innovative, conceptual, experimental, maybe unproven techniques that in some cases have been developed in other parts of the world. So someone mentioned earlier Oceanside study, and they're doing an international design competition because there are a lot of good solutions in other parts of the world where they've done these designs and they are working, they are performing as designed. And so we're trying to have that conversation because there is a challenge in getting some of these structures like groins and jetties and breakwaters permitted even though there is provision in the Coastal Act that allows beaches in danger of erosion to be protected with structures when you mitigate the impacts on sand supply. So we think it can be done. It may not be easy, it may not be fast, it may not be inexpensive, but we're certainly embarking upon this effort because it's that important to the city. So right now, all options are really on the table, innovative and proven strategies as well.
If I can say one more thought to that. The only other thought that crosses my mind, Ken, is that a proven strategy in my mind is beach nourishment. I've seen it happen successfully, but the key is enough of it. There's got to be enough of it. If there's not enough of it, it doesn't last, and it's called a failure because an expectation was it would stay there. So, another approach is to simply nourish with large quantities frequently enough that the beach stays. And if it's done over time, the beach can recover well enough to have enough sand in the system that it'll just hold a large beach, a big beach, wide beach for a longer period of time. So that's another approach. Rely on nourishment initially. But the problem with that is it costs a lot of money, and if you have to renourish frequently, it costs that much more money. So it can be a real costly thing, and it can be environmentally insensitive if it buries stuff. So it's also, there's habitat that could be buried that you don't want to have buried. So that's why we lean toward, well, let's not completely rely on nourishment. Let's have nourishment in the mix, but let's try to hold it in place with whatever kinds of concepts make some sense. And since there are these wave dissipation natural structures down at Trestles that work great, those became an obvious model to us. And yes, it hadn't been built by man, but it's there. So if we did exactly what's there, I got to believe it's going to work, even if it is unproven, I just don't think people have had the guts to do it, or the money, maybe that's better, or the permit, right? So anyway, I'll stop.
Dr. Susie Whitelaw, and I'm speaking tonight on my position with Save Our Beaches San Clemente. I got a lot to say, as usual. One thing is our group is thinking of getting together a group of surfers to kind of map out our surfing resources. And I can see that you've done a really good job of some of our surfing resources and trying to stay away from them. But I'm not a surfer, but it's my understanding there's a whole lot of smaller surf spots that if we got that together, it would be great if you guys could then incorporate that into your GIS system. And so we'd have that, and the city would always have that, as that's where our surfing resources are. And so we would like to work with you on that. I also agree with Ken that we need to have a plan for the whole coastline. I understand you can only design one or two things, and that was always the plan, but we should come up with, through this whole process of all these people spending their time, all the cities spending this time, Coastal Commission, come up with something that seems feasible and acceptable for the whole coastline and a whole plan. Starting with the most difficult and problematic one for me is the Cobble Boulder Delta. It's really hard for me to visualize that with what's going to happen there, and it would be helpful if you did like a cross-section of what that would look like. Where would the water be at different tide levels? Where would people be? Because what I see is that the sand rock interface would probably be like right at high tide, and I have kind of my mom instinct comes in. I see my kids playing there on the shoreline and getting dragged out and tumbled around in a bunch of rocks and cobbles. And so I kind of have a safety factor there that bothers me. The other thing that geologically, the Trestles is at a delta, and it's been at a delta for a long time. I'm not sure, but as you said, it probably has a more gently sloping shelf there, as opposed to the rest of San Clemente. And so that's something I'm sure that you will look at if you go further in the design concept with that. I personally think that T Street is a much better model because it is it's away from the Delta. It is working, as you say. That's the one beach that is stable, and it's great. We don't need to do anything. I think that you can engineer, I have confidence in you to engineer something that would last and replicate T Street. And I think the whole community could get behind more T Streets. Our group has talked to a group in the Netherlands called Reefy, and they have these big Lego blocks made out of concrete, and they're very stable. And it's just, and they haven't made an artificial reef out of them yet, but they claim that they are very stable, they can't be moved by anything. And they have grant money available for doing things in the US. And the deadline is December. So that's something to potentially think about. I really prefer the detached submerged breakwaters. You call them breakwaters. I'm not sure that they have to be emergent. Of course, you have to do your numerical modeling and see. I like them because what we've seen recently, a report came out, a scientific study showing that over the last 50 years, our winter storm waves have increased by an average of 1 foot, which is mostly an increase in waves over 13 feet. So we have two things going on, double whammy. We've got a decreased sand supply, which everyone knows is the main cause, but we also have an increase in wave energy. And those breakwaters do just what they say. They break the water, they break the wave energy. And I see them not only as a sand retention device, but a resiliency structure. They're going to break that wave energy that protects our beaches, it protects our infrastructure, and if and when sea level does rise, they're smaller structures than than these big things, and you just add more rock. And they could go upwards, and so it seems to me that would be more resilient with coastal change. I'm a big fan of that kind of artificial reef, and I would really like to see them proposed. You only have one concept for the south side and one concept for North Beach, and I would like to see those included as potential design concepts for both of those locations. The pier.
Before you continue, I'm sorry. You want to see the segmented breakwater as alternative concepts designs for North Beach and Cypress Shores?
Yes, I would like to see that. At the pier, I like the idea of slowing them down. The pier is the one place where it's actually going to get sand on a reliable basis. And one of the problems further down south is that the city, I understand why they do it. They push the sand up every winter. And so it doesn't get eroded, but it used to get eroded and come down south. And so it's kind of starving down south. And so I really personally would not be in favor of doing anything that keeps sand at the pier. We need to have some of that sand move south because they're getting it, needs to continue on moving south. State Beach is seriously eroding. It is not stable. I think there was something went wrong with the measuring. There's probably about 75 feet of beach left, not 200 feet beach. Number one. Number two, you have, down at Cypress Shores, there's zero beach. And then you go directly from red to green with no threatened in between. And just logically, you have to understand there's going to be a threatened area in between. And I walk there every week, and what I see is that it just keeps on marching northwards. There is zero beach at the southern boundary of the state park, and 5 to 10 feet just north of that. And so the state park beach is seriously eroded. You'll find that out when you measure in October. That you just don't have a measuring point there, so you're not seeing it. The living shoreline, the picture that you have looks like the entire beach would be vegetated.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably not what you meant.
That's not the intent.
Yeah. Yeah, we want a sandy beach. We don't want grass. And I'm afraid to tell you it's not going to work. The wave energy there is so huge. Already, there's been like 10 feet of vegetation. I can show you 100 pictures of vegetation just being torn out. It's deep vegetation, roots, 2 feet deep, that are just ripped out. And so vegetation is not going to hold back those waves there. We got to find some way to break the wave action before it hits the beach, and that's the submerged artificial breakwaters. Also with the Cardiff living shoreline, GHG says that they have to continually put on, every year they put, I don't know, maybe 10,000 yards of sand on top of it, because that they put cobble down on the beach, and it gets eroded down to cobble, and they have to keep on maintaining it with sand. And so that's something to keep in mind. They have an existing dredge program where it's easy for them to keep on resupplying a yearly amount of sand. And so anywhere that you have living shorelines, you need to continually be able to maintain it. Although it is beautiful. It's an absolutely beautiful project, and I do love it. Wheeler Reef, I know this is way beyond your scope of action, but I personally think that in 2019, they put the rocks, especially down at the south end, they put the rocks closer to shore and shallower water. And I think it's causing wave refraction, constructive wave interference, and creating like a roving areas of really super high waves. But that's beyond your scope of work to look at.
How deep is that reef?
Minus 35 is what we measured down at the south end. So Susie's right. It's shallower there than it is in certain areas. Closer to shore.
And also, just in my opinion, the short groins aren't going to work. I personally believe that the groins at Newport Beach, they go out 300 feet out past the shoreline. You don't see any buildup of sand on one side or the other. They're not trapping longshore drift. They're actually acting like breakwaters. And so that any wave coming in at an angle is going to have to hit that groin and the underwater groin and slow it down, just like the breakwaters do that are parallel to the shoreline. And wave diffraction would happen in between them and just kind of creates moving the sand around inside. They don't go anywhere. But it takes your numerical modeling to look at these things. I think that the short groins work when you do have a lot of sand being transported longshore, but any sand coming to Capo Beach, Capo Shores would have to come through Beach Road first, and there's no sand Beach Road that's moving south. And thank you. You've really done a lot of work, and I really appreciate all your creative ideas.
Thank you, Susie.
Good evening. My name is Susan Ambrose. I sit on the Coastal Advisory Committee. I sat on that committee for about 11 years until it disbanded for a year or two, and I was unanimously appointed again by the City Council to start the new Coastal Advisory Committee, and we are very excited about that. I'm mostly very excited about the work that you've been doing and showing us all these conceptual ideas. It's pretty clear, if you've seen these beaches, and many of us in this room have, from the ocean point of view, not from the sand point of view or standing on the beaches, you can see a clearer picture of how important monitoring is. And measuring, because all of these beaches cannot look alike in the reparations that you're doing and the sand retention that you're going to be doing. And that's just my opinion, but I think many people in the science world would agree with that. I'm really talking about tonight the need that Chris, you remember when we invited you as Coastal Advisory Committee in January of 2021, we talked about retaining or getting involved in regionalization, and you thought that was a great idea. We're still all plugging away with regionalization, but it's still the most important thing that I think our city should be involved in. And this evening, you made a comment about the city's going to have to spend money to get more sand, because we need more sand. The sand that we get from the Army Corps of Engineers is not going to last long enough and be here long enough. And my question to you is, in your function as consultants on this project, are you being asked to find sources for opportunistic sand for the city of San Clemente? Because that has been one of the operations that the city council has told us will be on our plate for the Coastal Advisory Committee. I would like to work hand in hand with you rather than across the room. So if you could keep us posted on that, we would really like to know that, because I believe we all concur, the more opportunity we have to have opportunistic sand and store it, the happier we'll all be. And the last thing I wanted to know is I had asked one of the city council members who was in charge of contacting Orange County when they discovered they had this pot of sand that they could give away, otherwise put it in the dump or something of that nature. And the response was they didn't know. And I hope that we have somebody in the city now, maybe it's somebody in your committee, maybe it's Leslie here, or even you, Cecilia, who keeps track of who's got what, where, and how. So all the W's and the H's, right? We know those simple questions need to be answered. So that's what I'm asking for as a member of the Coastal Advisory Committee. And I know that you will come through. I know that you will work hard on this. And thanks for the presentations tonight. Appreciate that.
I'd like to address your comment regarding the offshore borrow site investigation. The city. The city is in the process of putting together grant applications to obtain funding to conduct the offshore borrow site investigations. So we do know where there are some sand sources. There's work that we're building upon done by others previously. And so you'll be hearing more about that. And with regard to the opportunistic program that the County of Orange just completed, they're also putting together a SCOOP program, which is Sand Compatibility and Opportunistic Use Program. We're coordinating with them on that, and we know that at least North Beach will be a receiver site in the county's program. Whether the city decides to pursue their own SCOOP program again, that has not been determined at this time.
To turn it on. There we go, thank you. Yes, my name is Amanda Quintanilla. I'm a San Clemente resident of over 50 years, and I support a conservative approach. I'm strongly opposed to any cobble, boulder, living reef at North Beach. I grew up North Beach, and it's already pretty much rocky anyway right now. And I certainly wouldn't want the cobble, boulder, living shelf to increase that problem. And I'm concerned about people, because sometimes people kind of dive into, the waters, and that's a concern. So I really think that it's important to properly notify local surfers in that area of North Beach or any beach of what all these plans are coming about. So maybe some public notification, so that would be really important. I really support evidence-based data as a retired registered nurse, but I do not support any plans that are experimental, especially this boulder and what's working at Trestles. Well, that's natural, and creating something that's different, it's not based on, data that's new. I mean, it's new. It's not something that has been done for decades. So I really do not support that. And I was just wondering, how did you, what are the effects of the drain at North Beach? There's a runoff there, and was wondering, how does that runoff, that drainage area, affect the sand in that area?
I'm not sure I really know the answer to that question, how it really affects it. I think when it's not draining, it probably doesn't have any effect, of course, but when a big storm comes through and the runoff goes out through that outlet or outfall, the city typically, from what I recall, has to open it with a dozer. They typically have to go out ahead of time and breach it so the runoff has a place to go. I think high enough runoff would do it on its own. And I don't think it has the effect of, I guess I should sit closer to the mic, sorry. The effect of taking sand and, moving it offshore and causing it to be lost. I think it would simply scour a gap and flow through it, just enough of a gap, to be able to drain. But I don't think it does anything other than move sand out from in front of itself.
Okay, because I know there's some problems also with the shore closed drain too, so that's why I was wondering. Great, thank you so much. I appreciate, I guess that's it, just a conservative approach and nothing cobble boulder at North Beach. Thank you.
Again, Matt Schmidt, resident and hydrologist. I will just put the comment out there that breakwaters will affect surf. And the moment you start touching surf on our beaches, every surfer will focus their ire towards whatever we're doing. So the beach breaks and the beaches themselves are obviously in distress, but there's nothing wrong, and we should not, well, there is something wrong, but we should not go towards a Long Beach or a Santa Monica approach of breaking those. If we can create it into a surf break, I think that that is fair. Secondly, obviously in San Clemente, we have a north and a south. I've always learned it littoral, but it's literal. However you pronounce it, the drift, right? Do we understand what that input and output, what the budget, what the P&L of sand is? And I apologize if this was in a report.
It wasn't in the report.
Okay.
We do have that information. I can't recite it off my memory, but it's pretty well documented by both the Corps of Engineers and then others. And from what I recall, it's somewhat similar to, it's in San Diego County, of course, the San Diego littoral cell. It's the north end of the littoral cell, like Leslie had explained. And the pattern and volume of movement is similar to what happens in San Diego, which is on the order of maybe 1 million cubic yards per year in a gross sense goes back and forth. And it's not quite 50-50. It's slightly skewed to a little more goes south, like maybe 550,000 cubic yards a year heads south, and maybe the remaining 450,000 cubic yards a year goes north. It's it could be balanced, and it can even reverse during certain years and have a little bit go north and south. But for the most part, over the long term, you get a smidge more heading south.
And so the Army Corps is 250,000 cubic
Correct.
yards?
Yeah, 251.
So it's a drop in that bucket unless we do something to defend or dampen that flow, right? I guess I appreciate those numbers, so thank you.
I thought I was on green, I'm sorry. Tamara will coach me later.
Can you give me your name again?
Don Brown.
Don, thank you.
So the plan, I would think now, is to make a plan for the next sanding and start making sure find your borrow sites, go get grant money to look for good sand. The mother lode is Mission Bay. You'll have to talk to Kenny Nielsen and Bill Hart, all our great watermen that started the Coastal Advisory Committee. The further south you go, the next site north of that is by where the Del Mar racetrack is. And the further north you go, but we think we're going to get a lot, I don't know what quality sand you're going to get out of that SO16, according to our great watermen. So just be careful, but start laying the plan now with your current effort to go with SANDAG and cooperative efforts in the regional littoral, because the Army Corps is going to go to SO16 and give us 250,000 cubic yards. I went all through that stuff for months with them. So just start for the second go. We just did a pretty dramatic thing with a strategic railroad network which drives this whole rock thing mitigation. And as long as that railway is in our strategic network, there's designated railroad tracks in the United States that are part of the Department of Defense strategic network because of Camp Pendleton. What goes to, how you're going to get that camp to war drives how they're going to keep that railroad going. That's what drove all the rock that got just put out there. And they're going to do it every time. And the Coastal Commission knows by now, if they step in the way of that, they're going to get beat around a little bit. And they're going to do it anyway. The key is, eventually, they have to, OCTA and everybody else has to come up with mitigation. And how are they going to mitigate the current rock they just put down on Susie's Beach, and those big rocks took the sand away? Where is that mitigation going? They should bring sand and bring it to Cypress Shores. So the key is be on top of OCTA and the people that drive the mitigation that they're required now to go to Coastal Commission for, and where they're going to put it. And then the final real question in the room here is the big gorilla that's not in the room, and that is the Coastal Commission. And so the 5 or 6 years I was in Coastal Advisory, they were against groins. They were against all this stuff. So they've always been managed retreat. And so what's the tea leaves? I mean, you've worked with them, and I know I was on planning when you came with the first coastal plan to us, but is the winds changing up there in the Coastal Commission?
Probably not.
They're the gorilla that's not in this room tonight. So, I mean, we can have all sorts of ideas, but I just wanted to make sure, because you worked with them for years.
Yeah, and they are funding this study, and they do have guidance documents that they've published that provide information for cities like ours to review and utilize in designing projects like these resiliency projects. So we are working with them. We are using their guidance. We haven't presented anything formal to them yet, so they haven't had an opportunity to say yay or nay yet. But that'll happen. That's down the road.
Okay, so I mean, we all have to recognize they're not here tonight, and we can have all sorts of great ideas, but they got 25 members or 24, and they made us put a $90,000 50-foot sidewalk in up there to protect some sea oats right across in North Beach, crossing the train station. You can go look at it today. The sea oats are now dead. And I was there when they made us do that. Thanks a lot.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Taylor. I'm a resident of San Clemente and of council at Surfrider Foundation. Just to piggyback on that last comment, I think it is important to recognize, this is a Coastal Commission funded project, and I think it makes sense early on to really focus on things that are realistic in terms of what's going to gain approval, rather than wasting a lot of time and money and efforts that really aren't going to get a green light down the road. And I think looking at the name of this, nature-based, if you look at the parameters of, the examples that they give, when I looked on the website, they had living shorelines, they had oyster beds, they had, things that truly are nature-based. And what I saw today, I don't think really falls in that category. Many of these, the groins, the breakwaters, the boulder fields. So my urging is that you really prioritize things like living shorelines and take an ecological approach, and also follow the precautionary principle of just, let's not do any harm. These are really dynamic systems. Let's do an inventory of, the current habitat, the benthic communities. I walk the state beaches reach almost every day, and there's a lot of great potential dune habitat that we could restore there, which I think is really low-hanging fruit to put in, native vegetation. We've seen that works for retaining sand. I worry about some of these proposals and the potential negative impacts that it could have on, the stretches that are currently stable, just because there are unforeseen, consequences of especially these more fixed, massive structures that are being discussed tonight. So I would also urge just to do some sort of in-depth biological surveys before we take any major action to know what's there and make sure we're not doing any harm. That's it.
green. I was the first guy, and I didn't know the protocol. My name is Kent Robertson, and it is green.
Okay.
And also, I didn't get to say thank you for all this work that's been done and for the great creative ideas, for being innovative and not being kind of worried to throw stuff out there for us to consider, because I think there's some good ideas. Okay, during all the conversation, there's a couple of questions came up for me, Cypress Shore. It wasn't that long ago that there was 100 or something, 150 feet of sand there, and it's completely gone now. We talked about a 30, if it goes down 30 feet, it's gone forever. Sounds like the Wheeler Reef would stop that from happening maybe, because it's in that area, you're saying it's only 35 feet. Anyway, the question is, where did that sand go? And is it going to come back?
Good question. Don't know, probably not, would be my response. I don't think we know where it went, sir. I think it headed probably south, I'm guessing, I don't know. Because if it would have headed north, you might have seen it. And if it went south and it went far enough south, it's just not coming back, because there's too much interference for it to get back. If it goes south past Cottons and Trestles and, you know, all the way down past Churches, it's at San Onofre, and then it moves farther south that and it's in Camp Pendleton. It's not going to turn around and come back, probably, because it has to fight its way through all that other stuff. You know, that's the route that it takes slowly would be a long time for it to come back. And I don't think the southern swell works to move it north that long over time, for that long of a duration. I think we get more of the northern hemisphere direction pushing it to the south for a longer duration throughout the year than we have it reversing. So it just, whatever sand that was and wherever it went to, I'm guessing it's not coming back. So my sense is it needs to be backfilled and replaced with something coming from the north, maybe. And maybe that's existing sand that's in the system that's going to head down there, or new sand that somebody else puts out there at the Corps of Engineers type of project, a nourishment thing, where they add sand from outside of the littoral cell into the littoral cell to nourish it.
So there's just one proposal. I guess I'd like to ask for another proposal to recharge the sand, 150-foot beach like it used to be. And for the OTCA people, which is kind of what we expect as a mitigation for the boulders that they've placed. By the way, is the boulders create a particular scouring issue that creates no sand can be there?
I don't know, is the answer. I don't know that boulders beget more scouring necessarily. I think the boulders are a response to there's no sand, and so they're the way to block waves from causing more damage. But I'm sure there's plenty of people asking the question that you're asking, and so I don't know that. I do believe there would be a way to bring sand back and have it stay if there was enough of it. If it was bombarded with sand in very large volumes, I think it would be very slow to leave. But it's worth looking at, okay? It's worth looking at. Does the existing shoreline now cause a condition to actually have sand make it more difficult for sand to stay there? Just because of the fact that the rocks stick farther out now and stuff like that. So we don't have the charge to do that, but I think there might be another effort afoot that could be looking at that. That's going to be simultaneous or continue on.
It seems like the Coastal Commission ought to be looking at that for the mitigation requirement. Thank you.
I think John's going to be our last speaker. We need to be out of this room by 8 o'clock, and we want to give people an opportunity to go back around the room and look at the exhibits one more time and fill out the survey card that was handed out. Thanks.
Hello, John Dow, resident of San Clemente, member of Save Our Beaches and Coastal Advisory Commission. I applaud the ideas that have been presented here. I think having some kind of proactive sand retention structures are essential. I think that to people that have a knee-jerk reaction or just a reaction that we don't have to do something maybe a little dramatic outside the box, I think we have to consider the alternative. We are unique in San Clemente in that we have a railroad, and that railroad's going to be protected. And if we don't take proactive action, then we're going to end up with OCTA reactive reaction. And that just is going to result in more boulders, and what we see on the north end of town and the south end of town is just going to continue to converge. So we can either have rock structures laterally along the beach and no beach, or we can have rock structures thoughtfully placed that retain sand, preserve recreation, and provide the buffer that we need. The other thing I want to point out is that we're basically doing the OCT a favor by coming up with these alternatives because, again, we're protecting their infrastructure and we're doing it thoughtfully. And so they should be partners in this, both in terms of resources that they can contribute, funding and rail cars and sand. And they should be proactively dumping sand now on State Beach because that is at imminent risk. Lastly, I just would encourage, to the extent that we can accelerate this process, that we do so because in the presentation, it was December of 2025 where we're going to just present something to Coastal Commission. We know there's going to be some time after that. So we're looking at 2-3 years out, and I don't think we have that much time. I think that thoughtful, speedy action needs to happen. And I think, lastly, I just want to say that with respect to the Coastal Commission, I think that I would hope that they would be more receptive and open-minded. I think it's good that we're being creative and open-minded. I think they need to be so as well because, again, what's the alternative? Their mandate is to preserve and protect our beaches, and if they allow just rock to be dumped on the beach, that's not fulfilling their mission. So they should be open to ideas that we present. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And with the few minutes that we have left, Tamara had handed out a survey card, survey on one side, comments on the other. You're welcome to fill that out tonight and drop it off. Alternatively, we will post the recording of this meeting and the PowerPoint presentation online, and you may also submit comments that way. We'll have a link to the LCP email address, so you can submit information that way as well. And we will be receiving comments on the concepts through October 31st. Right. Thank you.